Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Welcome back to episode 4 of Finnish Friday, where we take a look at a cool Mosin and we talk about a lot of Mosin stuff. So let's get into it. Now what do we have here today? Well, you might have guessed it, it's a Finnish Mosin. But I'm not going to tell you right away which model this is. I'm going to let y'all guess. And at the end of the program, we'll see if you guess correctly, because some of these Finnish variants can get a little bit confusing, as we say in Nebraska. Now, the first thing on the agenda today, we're going to go through some YouTube comments from the last week. Now, the first one comes from Josh Allen. Now, he posted a comment on our video where we talked about some of the exciting things we have coming up here on the channel in 2022. And one of the things I requested in that video is you post the country that you're from, because I really like to get a feel for just how many different viewers from different countries we have on this channel, because it's a lot, although I don't quite know the entirety of the scope. I just know that it's a lot. Well, we got an interesting country. Josh Allen's from the communist capital of the world, California. Now, Josh says, Compton, California representing, with 3 exclamation points. So clearly he's proud of it. He's very proud of being behind enemy lines. So we salute you, Josh. Way to keep it up. And never give up fighting for freedom. Next comment comes from Trent on our Mosin Nagant Tweezers video, which was a very humorous skit. If you haven't watched that, go watch it. It was pretty funny. Now, Trent says the Mosin is essentially a portable toolbox. Now, he's not wrong, but what's great is he goes into why. He says, first of all, you got the screwdriver bayonet. Everybody knows that, right? I mean, you got to have that. The bolt guide wrench, which is a really handy thing in the bolt. And now magazine tweezers. Yes, that's right. The magazine is actually tweezers. And to prove it, if you haven't watched the video, I pulled my own hair out with it. It was kind of painful. Trent goes on to say, next up, how to use flint combined with the importer marking on the side of the receiver to start a fire. Now, this got me thinking. This might actually have some merit to it, because let's say you're out in the wilderness and you forget your fire starter. Maybe you forget your cigarette lighter, because that's what most people use to start fires, right? Well, let's say, you have a gun, right? If you've got cartridges, you can take out the powder and powder is quite flammable, so you can make a fire with that. But let's say you don't have any ammo, but you still have a Mosin. Well, you're in luck if you're able to find some flint somewhere on the ground or something slightly bearing resemblance to it. Maybe you're lucky to come across an old Indian arrowhead. Well, if you have a Mosin that has an importer marker etched into the side, it's really rough. It's a rough laser cut etching a lot of times. And it creates this rough surface. So if you can get something like flint to strike it just right, you're probably going to be able to create some sparks with that. Now, if your Mosin has no import marks on it, that's no good probably. You're going to need to find a good old 9130. This one doesn't quite have it. It's got some import markings up on the barrel, but they're very distinct and they're very... the cutting is not very deep, so this one is going to be no good for starting a fire to save your life. But I want to thank you, Trent. That was a really good idea and maybe an interesting topic for a future video. All right, the next comment we got is from Battle Piglet on our Mosin Nagant pitchfork bayonet video. And Battle Piglet says, when the hay bale talks back. I would imagine that if I came up to a hay bale and it started talking back at me, I would promptly want to break out my Mosin Nagant pitchfork bayonet and dispatch the situation very quickly. Another good joke coming out from this is, in Soviet Russia, hay bales you, with a Mosin. All right, the last comment we got is from John Schlachter. I don't quite know how to say that. Sorry, I'm Doing my best there. John Slotchter. Now John commented on our rust removal video, and he says, "Don't quit your day job. Useless content, mostly babble." I appreciate that, John. Thank you. And I don't really intend on quitting my day job anytime soon, so you have nothing to worry about there. All right, so we're going to move on to some emails now. We got a couple good ones this week. We got one from Bill P. Bill says, "Good day to you, Big Sam. I have found your YouTube channel and really enjoy it." Well, thank you. Appreciate you watching. That really means a lot. "I have 3 Mosins in my infant stage collection. I have a Finnish M39, a Russian M44 carbine, and a 9130 rifle made in 1934. Really cool guns. You have a very good eye, Bill. I was going to perform a headspacing test on the 9130 and M44 rifles, and I'm a little intimidated with removing the extractor, but I have to because I have to remove it in order to use the headspace gauge. Yeah, Bill also states he has a climber headspace gauge. I'm not totally familiar with that. And one of the reasons is because headspace gauges are actually pretty hard to come by these days. So first of all, Bill, good on you for actually getting one of those. They're kind of hard to get your hands on right now. So that's really cool. Now, the problem Bill's referring to is that the Mosin Nagant headspace is off of the rim of the cartridge. And it has this big old rim that you have to somehow get under the extractor, right? So the problem is the headspace gauges also have a big rim. And because of that, it can be really, really hard to get that on the extractor. So much so that you're really better off just removing the extractor, because the extractor isn't relevant for a headspace test. I mean, if you want to extract it, it's sort of helpful, but you could just put a clearing rod down your barrel if you really need to, if it's stuck in the chamber area. So not a big deal there. It's really better to just remove it, because then you have no resistance, and you can just, any resistance you get, rather, is going to be from that headspace gauge, and if the tolerance is too tight or not, and if you're able to close that. Now sometimes, if you're trying to headspace a rifle, you go to close the bolt, and you'll face resistance, but on Mosins, it can actually be not from the headspace itself, it can actually be from the extractor, the force of the extractor trying to get over the rim of the cartridge. So sometimes you can think, oh, it's really hard, it won't go into battery. That's good, it headspaces. But then you push it a little harder, the extractor gets over the rim of the case, and then you find it'll actually fully go into battery and the headspace is no good. So it's really helpful to simply remove the extractor from the equation, and it helps remove the guessing and also makes it just a little bit easier. Okay. Now Bill that goes on to ask, do you have a video on this or share the best, safest way to remove this fragile piece? Your headspace video did not show removing the extractor because the bolts did not have any installed. Very good eye, and that's why it was so easy to put them in and out and do the checking. Very, very simple. One more thing, can I interchange any Mosin bolt in any Mosin rifle? Okay, so 2 questions. Number 1, we don't have a video yet, but I will be posting one soon on how I remove extractors. It requires a couple interesting tools you may or may not have ready access to, but you can certainly get off the internet no problemo. And this is not the only way to remove it, but it'll just be kind of how I do it. I've had pretty good success with doing it, so I'll show you guys that here coming up fairly soon. Bill also asked, one more thing, can I interchange any Mosin bolt in any Mosin rifle? Well, that goes back to headspace. If your headspace is good, you have no issues, and your bolt is interchangeable. If you put a new bolt in your rifle and it doesn't headspace correctly, then it's not interchangeable. So you really want to do this even with like Mauser rifles, where theoretically you'd have perfect interchangeability. You really don't. When it comes to headspace, perfect interchangeability is kind of a wives' tale. At least you should always treat it as such. Most of the time, you'll probably be fine, has been my experience. However, it's always good to be on the safe side. Anytime you switch out a bolt in a rifle or put a new bolt in, it's always good to headspace. Now, we have things today like the AR platform, right? Where, Headspace, I think a lot of people don't really think about that too much. It's such a nice platform, and the machining technology today is so incredibly advanced. But on guns like this, older rifles, always good to err on the side of caution. That's Big Sam's recommendation. All right, so our next email comes up from Field. He says, hi Big Sam, this is Field from Seattle. I've been watching your Mosin videos for a while, and they have been super informative. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you, Field. I really appreciate that. Thanks for watching the videos. I found a Mosin at my local store that costs $600, and I hope to check with you before buying it. Unfortunately, they don't allow me to take any picture of the gun. A common problem with gun stores, unfortunately. So I'm going to try my best to describe what I saw with the knowledge I learned from your videos. Okay, hopefully he learned something, we'll see. If he didn't, that would be on my videos, not on him. He says, the Mosin is a 1939 Tula, maybe question mark. So it's a 1939 we know, but we don't necessarily know if it's a Tula, but we think it's a Tula. Could also be an Ijevsk, perhaps. 9130 rifle, 29-inch barrel. The exterior condition is excellent. No cracks on the stock at all, especially near the bolt. Metal finish is also great. No rust or pitting on the exterior at all. Bolt action is smooth. Markings are all clear. I didn't see the zero accuracy proof mark, so it should just be common 9130. I did see the black powder mark and a few other marks that I couldn't remember. One great thing is the serial numbers all match, doesn't seem to be a fake. The only thing that hesitates me is the bore. The bore still has strong rifling, but it's dark and pitted. I found a picture online that's quite similar. I would say the rifling is even stronger than the picture, but the pitting is pretty similar. In conclusion, I would describe this rifle as an all-matching regular 9130 with excellent exterior, but the bore is less great. I just started looking at collectible firearms, and Mosin is the first gun I want to get. Sorry again that I couldn't provide you with any actual pictures of the gun. Don't worry if it's too hard to evaluate accurately without pictures. Okay, so hopefully from that description you kind of got a little bit of a mental picture about what it is we're dealing with here. Okay, so what do we know? We have a 9130 rifle produced in 1939. Sounds like a pretty normal rifle. So the first thing you want to ask yourself is it an ex-sniper? That's really going to be the most likely thing to increase its potential value or collector interest. Is it an ex-sniper? Now, if it's a Tula, it could be. Remember, Ijevsk didn't make sniper rifles before 1942, so you're not going to find an Ijevsk ex-sniper from before 1942. But if it's a Tula, it could be. Now, to help illustrate this rifle a little bit better, I've got, well, a 1939 9130 produced by the Tula factory. Now, this one's pretty cool. Again, it's made by the Tula factory. This one's actually an ex-sniper, though. Now, the way to tell is, remember, it's got to be a Tula first of all, if it was made in 1939. You're going to have this big O star here on the barrel shank. Okay, so that's the first thing to look for. That tells you it's a Tula. Now, ex-snipers are going to have these two letters. On the left side of the star, you'll see a C, and then on the right side, it'll look like an N in 1939. The other way to tell, and if you don't have really good access to the gun or even good pictures, this is a PEM sniper. This used to be. PEM snipers will have a high wall receiver. There's no slant cut here on the side. Your standard 9130 rifle produced in 1939 is going to have a low wall receiver. It's going to have a nice little fancy cutout here on the side. This is called the high wall receiver. Now, the high wall receiver would be produced throughout World War II because it saves a little bit of time. You don't have to mill out that whole side, but this is a really easy way to tell if it's an ex-sniper as well. So if you've got an ex-sniper, it's going to make it worth a little bit more. Now, what we read from that is that there's two main things, though. There's two main things that I think about, and even if it's an ex-sniper, I don't think this would even really affect it that much. Number one's the price. He said it was $600. Now, in 2022, $600 for a 9130 rifle is kind of on the high end. That's quite a lot of money, I would say. So, you know, for $600, I think you might want to look elsewhere. The other thing that really does it in for me, though, he said the bore condition. He said it was a pretty pitted. He showed me a picture and definitely had some pitting. Now, this is not a deal breaker for any Mosin because there's a lot of Mosins, even ones we see here a lot of times on the channel, that have pitting in the bores. These guns were in some pretty bad places a lot of the time. Pitting in the bore is nothing crazy, and a rifle can still shoot very well even if there's some pitting in the bore. That's not really my point. My point is more of, okay, compare the price and availability. Paying $600 on a very high end for one with a pitted bore doesn't really make a lot of sense, because I think you can pay less, maybe even much less, for one that has a much nicer bore. This is the thing with Mosins. They're kind of like used cars. There's some really good deals, and then there's some okay deals, and then there's some, you know, you could have gotten a better deal on that one. This one would fall into the latter of those categories. I think we're best just keep looking for now. If you're interested in Mosins, that's awesome, but patience is a really important virtue to learn when shopping for some of these rifles. So I would say keep looking. That would be Big Sam's advice. But a cool gun nonetheless. Nothing against the gun. Very cool. So thank you, Field, for that email. I really appreciate it. The last email we're going through today is one that I didn't quite get to last week, so we're going through it this week. This email comes from Keith W., and Keith says, I really enjoy and appreciate your videos. Thank you. That means a lot, sir. I have just rewatched your 1940 Sacco M2830 Mosin Nagant video, third or fourth time. That I about fell off my chair when I read that. That was one of our very first videos. It didn't even have sound. It was pretty much just panning the camera around the gun, showed it like disassembled with no sound. You, sir, are a very dedicated viewer. Much respect. I don't think I could watch that video 3 or 4 times. Now, Keith goes on to say, the first firearm that I ever bought, not me, Keith, was a 1939 Sacco M2830 rifle. That is pretty cool. That is a really cool gun. And the fact that that was your first firearm is impressive. Sort of like cars, you know, a lot of people, when you ask them, well, what was your first car? Well, I had a 89 Honda Civic, you know. It was nothing to write home about, but it got the job done. Some people can say, well, I had a 94 Dodge Viper, you know. Keith had a 94 Dodge Viper of guns, as far as I'm concerned. A really fantastic classic that's appreciating. So nicely done, Keith. He goes on to say, unfortunately, there is no date on the underside of the receiver. Now, he's talking to the date on the underside of the tang here. If you're not familiar with that, go check out our video entitled, "Is Your Mosin Nagant an Antique?" or something like that. The actually way to tell is there's a date on the barrel, but there's another date on the bottom of the receiver tank here. Now, some Mosins won't actually have a date there. Sometimes you'll see Tulas that'll just have the hammer under there, no date. I'm still doing research on those to figure out exactly the time frame of when those were made. But generally, when you find no date, it's going to be potentially an old antique French Mosin, although there's some other things that you need to look for, and we'll go over those in a separate video. Generally, though, it's going to be an American receiver, most likely made by either New England Westinghouse or the Remington factory. So it's not really a bummer that there's no date, because it means something else. But let's say it's an American receiver. I think this is fascinating. So think about this. You've got this really cool military surplus rifle, an M2830, which actually looks really similar to this. The main difference between this rifle here on the table and an M2830 is just the rear sight, but it's mostly the same gun other than that. Again, I'll give it away what this is at the end of the video. So imagine this. So it's a Russian gun. It's a Russian Mosin, which is sort of, I think, redundant. It's a design. It's a Russian design. When you think Mosin, you think Russian. Except it's not Russian. In the case of Keith's, he's got a Mosin that was made in America, probably, most likely, with a barrel made in Finland. So an American Finnish barrel thing. That's pretty strange and really cool. Not a lot of other guns can be that unique. With Mosins, you just don't know what you're going to get. Every one is different. That is cool. So Keith, you might have an American Mosin on your hands. That's pretty cool. Now he says, I think I paid $79 for it. Advertised as a Finnish forestry rifle. Now I don't know when or where he got this. This was probably a long time ago. $79, he made a pretty good investment, because now that rifle's worth at least $1,200. So 79 bucks to 1,200 bucks. I think you did pretty well, Keith. I like the idea of a Finnish forestry rifle as well. Unfortunately, I haven't got to see any pictures of this rifle yet, but it sounds very delightful. Again, it looks mostly similar to this. He also says, the first time I took it to the range, I set up my target on the 200-yard range, and then I hiked back to the shooting bench. The 200 yards is a little bit of a hike, especially for us folks who are a little getting up there in years, right? It's not a trivial task. I aimed, closed my eyes, half expecting it to blow up in my face, and pressed the trigger. I fired a second round, which I guess if you fired a second round, that means it didn't blow up in his face. Of course, then again, he sent me this email, so probably didn't blow up on him. That's always a good thing, right? That's something to be happy about. I fired a second round with my eyes open, but I could not see where my shots had hit. The range master had been watching through his scope. I was the only shooter at the time. He opened the mic on the loudspeakers. Both in the black. You got a good shooter there, kid. Keith says, it wasn't me. It was the 2830. Now, I love stories like this. I love reminiscing about the good old days when people were buying Mosins before Big Sam was born for, the price of a loaf of bread. Sometimes I think I was born in the wrong decade, folks. But now that being said, I love hearing those stories. If you got a cool story like that of how you got your first Mosin, send me an email. Maybe we'll talk about it next week or something. But yeah, and it seems like some of these Mosins, especially the Finnish ones and the 2830s, are such good shooters. It almost seems like they can aim themselves and you just have to be the one to pull the trigger. I mean, the accuracy of a lot of these Finnish rifles is just uncanny. It's the stuff legends are made out of. Very, very impressive. And one of the reasons they continue to go up in value every year. Now, the M2830 rifle, the closest thing I can equate it to It's basically a competition rifle, a military issue competition rifle. It's very similar to the Swiss K31. Now the Swiss K31 is a much nicer, I guess, fit and finish because it's all Swiss, and a lot of the 2830s, I mean, they used old Russian receivers from World War I, right? So, I mean, they did the best with what they had, and it turned out to be pretty good. The K31s are a little bit nicer. Now, the K31s, though, while being target rifles, essentially military-issued target rifles as well, they never saw combat. Most of the ones you see look brand new. That's cool. You could get one in really nice condition, but from a combat war story standpoint, they don't really have that many cool things to tell us. Now, these rifles, though, have some fascinating things to tell us. You've got the whole history of the Finnish winter and continuation wars, and then all the ghosts of the past from before there, going back to World War I and even before that. Really fascinating rifles. And the 2830 is really going up in value, seems like almost on a monthly basis now. I think that's quickly becoming the new SVT-40. Those used to be pretty cheap. Now SVT-40s are over $2,000. It's not going to be long before we see 2830 rifles over $2,000. That's just the way it is. So now may not be a bad time to pick one up if you've got some money to spend, maybe upcoming like a tax refund soon. Who knows? All right, so that does it for emails. Now, I want to talk about, real quick, this thing. You've been staring at this horrible abomination the whole time. We had a post the other day with this picture, and the YouTube comment of the week goes to one Daniel Nelson. Daniel simply and succinctly sums up this picture as follows. He's exercising his rights. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys. I had to throw that one in there. So big kudos to you, Daniel Nelson. Thank you for sharing that with us. Okay. Whew. So that's the mailbag this week, folks. We had some really good stuff. Really appreciate all of y'all watching the videos and sending your questions and comments. Really appreciate it. So this gun, where I said at the beginning of this video, we'd talk about what it is. Maybe, what did you guess? Well, I guess I gave it away. You know it's not a 2830 rifle. Is it an M39? M27? What is it? None of the above. This guy is actually a Finnish M28 Civil Guard rifle. Now, it's really, really similar to an M27 rifle, and it's really, really easy to mix up the two. There's really two good, easy ways to distinctify the M28 from the M27. The M27 is going to have these big wings here on the rear sight coming down on the sides of it. That's to help stabilize and protect the rear sight. The M28s don't have that. So if you don't see those, it's pretty good chance it's an M28. The big thing that you want to look for, though, is right up here. See, there's a little notch cut out in the handguard. Hold this up a little bit. Right here. See where my finger's pointing? Well, that guy, that little hole there in the top of the handguard, is going to tell you that you're dealing with an M28 rifle. M27 rifles don't have any type of hole at the top of that barrel band, the barrel band up there. It'll just be one solid piece of metal going all the way around. So if you see that little hole at the top, you know you're dealing with an M28 or an M2830 rifle. To figure out the difference between the M28 and the M2830 rifle, you want to look at the rear sight. The M28s, like this guy, are going to have this Konovalov style rear sight. The M2830 rifles do away with this whole sight and sight base assembly and in favor of the Finnish M39 rear sight. Really cool gun. So we're dealing with a Finnish M28 here. Always a pleasure to bring y'all more Finnish Mosins on Finnish Friday. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. We got some cool videos coming up, hopefully this weekend. Don't forget to especially be watching out for that extractor removal video. We're going to call it the Big Sam technique for how to get that rascal off of there. A lot of more cool stuff coming down the pipeline, folks. So if you haven't already, I really appreciate all of y'all subscribing. It means a lot to me. Really helps encourage me to continue the interesting research that we do here on the channel with all things Mosin Nagants. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know if y'all have any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.